2:23 p.m., May 17, 1945, American chemical engineer Dr. Howard Fischer stood in the main laboratory of the IG Farben plant in Ludwigshafen. Around him were 847 technical documents, detailed process descriptions, precise chemical formulas, decades of German research. Fischer's task was simple: confiscate everything, pay nothing. Germany had lost the war. America would take the technology. The Fischer-Tropsch process, the most revolutionary chemical innovation of the 20th century, would become American property without compensation. This isn't just the story of an invention. This is the documented account of a systematic technology theft. Franz Fischer was no ordinary German chemist. In 1902, he earned his doctorate from the University of Marburg. His dissertation on coal chemistry had refuted 3 established theories. By the age of 28, he was already director of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Coal Research in Mülheim on the Ruhr. But Fischer had identified a problem that no one else saw. Germany had no oil reserves. 0. In the event of a conflict, a lack of fuel would grind every German engine to a halt. Fischer needed a solution: to transform coal into liquid fuel. That was theoretically impossible. Fischer's team would need 15 years to make the impossible possible. 1925. Fischer's laboratory in Mülheim. After 4,783 failed experiments, his team had achieved a breakthrough. The key was a catalytic reaction at a precise temperature and pressure. Carbon monoxide plus hydrogen over a cobalt iron catalyst at exactly 190 degrees Celsius and 20 bar of pressure. The result was liquid hydrocarbons, synthetic gasoline. The first successful conversion of coal into high-grade fuel in human history. Fischer and his colleague Hans Tropsch published their findings in the Journal of Fuel Chemistry. The chemical world was shocked. Germany had just eliminated its dependence on imported oil. Hans Tropsch was the second genius behind the invention. Born in 1889 in Komotau, now Chomutov, he had studied chemistry in Prague. In 1920, he joined Fischer's Institute. Tropsch was the practical thinker. Fischer had the theory. Tropsch built the equipment. He developed the first functional high-pressure reactor for catalytic coal conversion. The problem was temperature control. At 190 degrees, the reaction ran optimally. At 210 degrees, the hydrocarbons exploded. At 170 degrees, the reaction stopped completely. Tropsch designed a cooling system with circulating thermal oil. Precision plus or minus 1.5 degrees over 48 hours of continuous operation. That was revolutionary engineering in 1925. His reactor design remained the industry standard until 1960. But the real innovation lay in the details that Fischer didn't publish. The exact catalyst composition: 100 parts cobalt, 5 parts thorium oxide, 8 parts magnesium oxide, 200 parts diatomaceous earth. The particle size had to be between 0.1 and 0.3 millimeters. The activation temperature was exactly 380 degrees Celsius for 16 hours in a hydrogen atmosphere. The reactor pressure had to be maintained within a 5-bar tolerance. The temperature control required precision of plus or minus 2 degrees. Any deviation reduced the yield by 15 to 40%. This wasn't just chemistry. This was German engineering at its highest level. IG Farben immediately recognized the commercial potential. In 1926, the corporation bought all patent rights from Fischer. The purchase price was 3.2 million Reichsmarks, about 48 million euros in today's currency, or approximately $52 million USD. But IG Farben wasn't just paying for the existing patents. The contract guaranteed Fischer and his team unlimited research funding. By 1936, IG Farben had invested 127 million Reichsmarks in the development. The result was 18 industrial production plants. Each plant could produce 4,000 barrels of synthetic fuel per day. By 1944, Germany was producing a total of 124,000 barrels per day from coal. 90% of German aviation fuel came from Fischer-Tropsch plants. Without this process, the Luftwaffe would have been grounded after 6 months. The first industrial plant opened in Schwarzheide in 1936. Construction costs, 47 million Reichsmarks. The plant was gigantic, 240 meters long, 180 meters wide, 12 reactor towers, each 28 meters high, a total of 847 kilometers of pipelines, 342 valves, 89 pumps, 67 heat exchangers. The plant employed 1,247 workers in 3 shifts. Production capacity, 600,000 tons of synthetic fuel per year. That was equivalent to about 4.2 million barrels. The quality of the fuel surpassed natural gasoline. Octane rating of 87 instead of 73 for normal gasoline. Sulfur content below 0.001%, perfect for aircraft engines that required the highest purity. German pilots noticed the difference immediately. Engines ran 15% cleaner. Maintenance intervals were extended by 40%. The Allies knew this. American military planners had marked Fischer-Tropsch plants as priority bombing targets. Between 1943 and 1945, the U.S. Air Force and the Royal Air Force flew 847 bombing raids against IG Farben production facilities. The plant in Leuna was bombed 22 times. A total of 128,000 tons of bombs fell on German synthetic fuel factories. But the plants were built deep underground, with 4-meter-thick concrete ceilings, reinforced with steel girders. The bombers could destroy the buildings, but not the underground reactors. After each attack, German engineers repaired the damage in 3 to 8 weeks. Production continued. The Allies bombed the technology they couldn't stop. After the war, they would simply steal it. The bombing campaign against Fischer-Tropsch plants revealed American interest in the technology. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey analyzed the damage after each attack, not just to assess the destruction, but to understand the plants. How were the reactors constructed? What components were most vulnerable? How quickly could the Germans repair them? A report from March 15, 1944, described the Leuna plant in detail. Reactor count, 18. Production capacity, 8,000 barrels per day. Weaknesses, cooling water supply and electricity supply. But the report also contained a remarkable recommendation. Quote, "The complete capture of this technology after the war should be given the highest priority." End quote. America planned the theft while it was still bombing. May 17, 1945. Operation Paperclip was officially a program to recruit German scientists. Unofficially, it was the largest technology theft in modern history. The Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, or CIOS, had compiled a list of 3,527 German patents and technical processes. Number 14 on that list was the Fischer-Tropsch process. The directive was crystal clear. Seize all documents, interrogate all key personnel, confiscate all commercial rights, pay no compensation. Germany was occupied. American military law permitted seizure without due process. IG Farben technically now belonged to the Allies, and with it, all its patents. Dr. Howard Fischer was not alone in Ludwigshafen. His team comprised 23 American chemical engineers, 7 British petroleum experts, 12 French industry specialists. They worked methodically. Every document was photographed, every formula was copied, every process description was catalogued. The Germans had kept meticulous records, exact temperature curves for every production step, detailed material lists with suppliers, maintenance logs with wear analyses, quality control data from 1936 to 1945. Cost accounting per barrel of fuel produced in 6 weeks. Fischer and his team seized the complete technological knowledge of 20 years of German research. The seizure was precisely organized. Each team had specific tasks. Team Alpha photographed technical drawings, 2,147 reactor plans, 1,342 pipeline diagrams, 847 electrical schematics. Team Bravo catalogued chemical formulas, 489 catalyst recipes, 723 process optimizations, 128 quality control protocols. Team Charlie interrogated German personnel, 67 chief engineers, 189 plant managers, 342 laboratory chemists. Every interrogation was recorded stenographically. The transcripts later filled 12,147 pages. The operation was as systematic as a military invasion, and the target was not territory but knowledge. But the most valuable information didn't come from documents. It came from the German engineers themselves. Dr. Heinrich Butefisch had been the technical director of IG Farben's fuel division. He knew every aspect of the Fischer-Tropsch process. The Americans interrogated him for 89 days, 6 to 10 hours each day. They wanted the details that weren't in the documents, the practical tricks. How do you prevent catalyst poisoning by sulfur traces? Answer: 0.3% calcium oxide additive plus pretreatment at 420 degrees. How do you maximize the gasoline fraction versus diesel? Answer: increase reactor temperature to 210 degrees, increase pressure to 25 bar, reduce dwell time by 40%. How do you extend catalyst life from 3 to 8 months? Answer: continuous hydrogen purge with 2% flow. Avoid temperature cycles every 72 hours. Butefisch gave them everything, not because he wanted to, but because the alternative was indictment as a war criminal. The Nuremberg trials were already underway. IG Farben executives were on trial. Butefisch knew that cooperation was his only chance. He handed over 1,247 pages of handwritten notes to the Americans, detailed descriptions of problems and solutions that were nowhere documented, the implicit knowledge that only comes from years of practical experience. The Americans called it debriefing. In truth, it was forced technology transfer, under threat of prison. The legal basis for these seizures was thin. The Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917 theoretically allowed the seizure of enemy property, but the law was intended for wartime. The war had officially ended on May 8, 1945. The seizures began on May 17th. Technically, Germany was no longer the enemy, but occupied territory. But that didn't matter. Allied Control Council Proclamation Number 2 from September 20th, 1945, retroactively declared all German patents null and void. Article 3 of this proclamation transferred all industrial property rights to the occupying powers, without compensation, without the right of appeal, without a time limit. In a single day, Germany lost decades of technological advantage, but it got even more systematic. The Office of Technical Services, or OTS, was founded in November 1945. Its mission was the dissemination of seized German technology to American companies. By 1948, OTS had published 2,867 German technical reports. Each report cost American companies 25 cents. For that, they gained access to research that had cost Germany millions. The Fischer-Tropsch process was published as Technical Report 718, 342 pages, complete with reactor plans, catalyst recipes, process parameters, cost calculations. Standard Oil of New Jersey received a free copy directly from the U.S. Department of War. 2 years later, Standard Oil filed a patent for a synthetic fuel process. The similarity to the Fischer-Tropsch process was no coincidence. Technical Report 718 was extraordinarily detailed. Section 1 described the complete reactor geometry. Inner diameter, 4.2 meters. Height, 28 meters. Wall thickness, 47 millimeters of chromium steel. Section 2 listed all catalyst components, exact quantities, suppliers, activation protocols. Section 3 documented operating parameters, temperature profiles from minute to minute over 72 hours, pressure fluctuations, and their impact on yield. Section 4 analyzed cost structures, coal price per ton, energy consumption per barrel of fuel, labor costs per shift, maintenance intervals and spare parts costs. This was no scientific publication. This was a complete operating manual. Any American company could immediately build a Fischer-Tropsch plant with it. Without a single experiment of their own, the German inventors watched helplessly. Franz Fischer was already 73 years old in 1945. He died in 1947, without ever receiving compensation for his life's work. Hans Tropsch had died in 1935, before he could see the full commercial use of his invention. Their heirs received nothing. IG Farben was officially dissolved in 1952. The successor companies, BASF, Bayer and Hoechst, received parts of the original plants back, but no patent rights. The Fischer-Tropsch patents remained in American, British and French hands. Germany, the country that had developed the technology, could only use it under license, and the license fees flowed to foreign companies. The irony is that the Americans hardly used the technology for decades. After 1945, oil was cheap and plentiful. Synthetic fuel from coal cost about $12 per barrel in 1950. Oil cost $2 per barrel. Economically, Fischer-Tropsch made no sense. American companies let the patents gather dust in drawers. Only South Africa, which was under an oil embargo, built large Fischer-Tropsch plants. Starting in 1955, the company Sasol produced 150,000 barrels a day until 1980. 1,000 barrels of synthetic fuel, built with German technology, under South African patents, licensed by America, but originally stolen from Germany. The Sasol story is particularly telling. In 1950, the South African government commissioned German engineers to build a Fischer-Tropsch plant. Why Germans? Because they alone had the practical experience. The Americans possessed the patents, but not the know-how. South Africa paid the US $2.4 million in licensing fees. Then, South Africa paid German engineers $8.7 million to actually build the plant. The first Sasol plant in Sasolburg opened in 1955, built by 47 German engineers and led by Dr. Erich Regul, who had worked at the IG Farben plant in Luna until 1945. Regul knew everything about Fischer-Tropsch. He had spent 12 years in Luna. The Americans had interrogated him in 1945. Now, he was building for South Africa what Germany was no longer allowed to build. The technology made a world tour, from Germany to America as war booty, from America to South Africa as a license, from South Africa back to German engineers as a construction contract. Today, Fischer-Tropsch plants are experiencing a renaissance. Oil prices have risen. Environmental regulations are promoting synthetic fuels. Shell operates the world's largest Fischer-Tropsch plant in Qatar. Production capacity, 140,000 barrels per day. The plant uses natural gas instead of coal as a feedstock, but the chemical principle remains identical: catalyst, temperature, pressure, residence time. Everything is based on Franz Fischer's research from 1925. Shell paid no licensing fees. The patents have long expired. But the moral question remains. Should systematic wartime theft still be considered legal after 80 years? The Shell Pearl GTL plant in Qatar is technically impressive. Construction costs $19 billion. Opened in 2011, the plant covers an area of 1.2 square kilometers, 24 Fischer-Tropsch reactors, each 38 meters high and 10 meters in diameter, a total of 3,200 kilometers of pipelines. The plant employs 6,500 people. It produces 140,000 barrels of synthetic diesel per day, plus 120,000 barrels of naphtha and kerosene. The quality surpasses petroleum diesel. Cetane number of 75 instead of 51. Sulfur content is practically zero. But when you analyze the reactor plans, you see the DNA of 1925. Catalyst bed design, temperature gradient management, product separation through fractional condensation. All concepts that Franz Fischer developed. Shell calls it proprietary technology. But its roots lie in Mülheim on the Ruhr. The German engineers who developed the process died in poverty. Franz Fischer received the Karl Duisberg plaque in 1935 for his services. An honorary medal. No money. His salary as institute director was 18,000 Reichsmark per year. About $300,000 USD in today's currency. A good salary, but nothing compared to the commercial value of his invention. IG Farben earned an estimated 2.4 billion Reichsmark with Fischer-Tropsch fuel between 1936 and 1945. Roughly $40 billion USD in today's purchasing power. Fischer saw virtually none of it. After 1945, he lived on a small pension, 240 Deutschmark per month. He died in his apartment in Munich in 1947. No obituary in American newspapers, no recognition for the technology that America had stolen. Fischer's last years were tragic. After 1945, he tried unsuccessfully to obtain compensation. In June 1946, he wrote a letter to the American military government. He explained that he had developed his process in 1925, long before National Socialism. He asked for recognition of his authorship, for fair compensation for confiscated patents. The letter was never answered. In October 1946, he tried again. This time he turned to the British Control Commission. Again, no answer. Fischer was 74 years old. His health was deteriorating. On December 2, 1947, he died of heart failure. His wife, Martha, found him in his study in the morning. On his desk lay a half-finished letter to the French military command, a last desperate attempt to get justice. The letter was never sent. Dr. Heinrich Büterfisch, who had revealed the process details to the Americans, was still convicted. The Nuremberg IG Farben trials sentenced him to 8 years in prison in 1948 for forced labor in IG Farben factories. His cooperation in the technology transfer was not recognized as a mitigating circumstance. He remained in Landsberg prison until 1952. After his release, he worked as a consultant for Ruhrchemie AG. He was not allowed to use his knowledge of Fischer-Tropsch commercially. The patents belonged to the Allies. Büterfisch died in 1969, bitter, impoverished, forgotten. But the technology lives on. Modern Fischer-Tropsch plants are highly automated. Computer-controlled reactors, precise temperature control to 0.1 degrees, pressure control with 0.01 bar accuracy. Catalyst recipes have been optimized. Instead of cobalt iron, modern plants use cobalt-ruthenium catalysts with 15% higher yield. The reactor temperature has been increased to 230 degrees Celsius, the pressure to 35 bar, the residence time reduced to 4 seconds. The product yield increased from 65% in the 1940s to 94% today. But each of these improvements is based on the fundamental principle that Franz Fischer discovered in 1925. Carbon monoxide plus hydrogen over a catalyst at high temperature and pressure yields liquid hydrocarbons. The modern improvements are impressive, but incremental. Cobalt-ruthenium catalysts were first developed by Shell in 1978. The yield increased from 80 to 92%, but the basic principle remained identical. Catalytic conversion at high pressure. In 1995, Sasol introduced microchannel reactors. Instead of large reactors with a 4-meter diameter, they use thousands of small channels. Each channel is only 2 millimeters wide. The total reactor surface area increases by a factor of 50. The reaction rate increases by 300%. But again, everything is based on Fischer's discovery. In 2008, China developed iron catalysts that work at lower pressure. Instead of 35 bar, only 20 bar. This reduces energy costs by 18%. But the chemical reaction remains unchanged. Carbon monoxide plus hydrogen equals hydrocarbons. Exactly as Fischer described it in 1925, the economic calculation has changed. In 1950, Fischer-Tropsch diesel cost $12 per barrel when crude oil was $2. Today, Fischer-Tropsch diesel costs about $95 per barrel when crude oil is $85. The gap has narrowed from 600% to 12%. At oil prices above $100, Fischer-Tropsch becomes profitable. That's why companies are investing again. Shell invested $19 billion in the Qatar plant. Sasol is planning a $14 billion plant in Louisiana. China is building 8 new Fischer-Tropsch plants at a total cost of $37 billion. German companies are conspicuously absent from this list. The country that invented the technology now imports Fischer-Tropsch know-how from China and South Africa. The irony is palpable. China's aggressive investment in Fischer-Tropsch is strategically motivated. The country has massive coal reserves, 138 billion tons of proven reserves. But China imports 70% of its oil. Fischer-Tropsch offers energy independence. Between 2010 and 2020, China built 26 commercial Fischer-Tropsch plants. Total production, 280,000 barrels per day. The largest plant in Erdos, Inner Mongolia, produces 48,000 barrels daily alone. Construction cost, $8.6 billion. But here's the real kicker. China didn't license the technology from Germany. China bought the technology from South Africa, from Sasol, for $1.2 billion. Sasol had licensed the technology from America. America had stolen it from Germany. The technology makes an absurd journey. Germany develops, America steals. South Africa licenses, China buys, Germany gets nothing. The legal situation remains absurd. The original Fischer-Tropsch patents expired between 1945 and 1952, but the seizures didn't just involve patents. They involved technical knowledge, process descriptions, operating experiences. This implicit knowledge is not patentable, but commercially valuable. The Americans handed it over to their industry for free. The damage to Germany is hard to quantify. A 2003 study by the University of Hohenheim estimated the value of all confiscated German patents at $12 to $17 billion. In 1948 dollars, adjusted for inflation, that's $180 to $250 billion today. Fischer-Tropsch alone accounted for probably 8 to 12% of that, about $18 billion, never paid, never acknowledged. The scale of the theft is staggering. There are precedents for retroactive compensation. Switzerland paid a total of $1.25 billion in 1998 for Jewish assets confiscated in World War II. Germany has paid over 89 billion euros in reparations to Holocaust survivors since 1952, but there is no compensation program for confiscated patents. Technology is not considered property in the same sense as money or land. The Hague Convention of 1907 prohibits the plunder of private property. But does a patent count as private property if it's held by a company that served the enemy state? Lawyers disagree. The victims of the theft are all dead. Franz Fischer's name appears in chemistry textbooks today as the inventor of the Fischer-Tropsch process, usually in a paragraph, sometimes with a photo, rarely with the full story. The story of how his invention was systematically stolen, how his life's work was confiscated without compensation, how American companies made billions with German technology, how the victors of the war not only took territory and reparations, but also decades of scientific research. That's not in the history books, and that's not in the patent documents, but it's the truth, a hard truth to swallow. The technical details that America seized in 1945 are now publicly available. Technical Report 718 was declassified in 1999. Anyone can read it online, 342 pages of complete process descriptions, but the moral question remains unanswered. Was it legal to take German engineers' life's work? The Americans argued that IG Farben worked for the German war effort. That was true. Without Fischer-Tropsch fuel, Germany couldn't have fought the war, but Franz Fischer developed his process in 1925. Long before National Socialism, his motivation was scientific curiosity, not military aggression. Should a scientist be punished because his invention was later misused? It's a question that haunts the narrative. The parallel to modern technology disputes is obvious. Today, companies fight for years in court over patent infringements. Apple sued Samsung over rounded corners on smartphones. The lawsuit lasted 7 years. Samsung eventually paid $539 million. But America took the entire Fischer-Tropsch process, without a trial, without compensation, without the right of appeal. The only difference was that Germany had lost the war. Victors not only write history, they also rewrite property law. The victors take all. The double standard is remarkable. In 1947, America sued the Dutch company Philips. For patent infringement, Philips had allegedly violated American radio patents. The trial lasted 3 years. Philips paid $18 million in damages. At the same time, America was confiscating German patents worth billions without any compensation. The argument was that the laws of war were different, but the laws of war do not allow unlimited confiscation of civilian inventions. The Hague Convention of 1907 explicitly protects intellectual property. Article 46 prohibits confiscation of private property. Article 47 prohibits plunder. America ignored both articles. The justification was that IG Farben served the German war effort. That was true, but IG Farben was a private company, not a government agency. The shareholders had no control over the military use of their technology. Should shareholders be expropriated because their company fulfills government contracts? A question that is still debated today. The consequences of this policy reach to this day. After 1945, German scientists became extremely cautious about patent applications. Why research for years if the results can simply be confiscated? This culture of caution slowed down German innovation for decades. Between 1945 and 1960, German companies filed 68% fewer patents than between 1925 and 1940. The damage was not just economic, it was psychological. German trust in international property law was destroyed. To this day, German companies are more reserved with patents than American or Japanese competitors. The shadow of 1945 still hangs over the German innovation culture. A chilling reminder of the cost of war. The lesson is clear. In war, you don't just lose people and cities, you also lose ideas, innovations, technological knowledge. And while cities can be rebuilt, while borders can be redrawn, stolen knowledge remains lost forever. Franz Fischer died without knowing that his invention would be worth billions in the 21st century, without knowing that companies in Qatar, China, and South Africa would be using his process, without recognition, without compensation, only with the bitter certainty that America had stolen his life's work, and no one would ever give it back. A tragedy etched in the annals of scientific history.